Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on what time you're watching. This is Alex Dashiska, your confidence whisperer, and today I have the utter pleasure of interviewing Paula Williams. So Reverend Dr. Paula Stone Williams is a highly sought after international speaker on gender equality and a transgender minister. And how I found Paula was by a total accident. Just last week, I saw her TEDx talk. Her TEDx talks have all over 5 million views, I think. Is that correct?
Altogether, yep.
Yep. And that talk was entitled, I've lived as a man, I've lived as a woman, here's what I learned. And it made me cry and it made me laugh. It made my day. And I just decided I wanted to interview you. So thank you so much for doing this and for being, so responsive, and also for giving that talk. Wonderful to have you here with me today.
Oh, it's good to be here. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure for me to give that talk too. It was quite an honor. That was the first of 4 TED Talks I've done altogether.
Wow.
And that one is still the most popular of all of them.
Well, it was amazing. I thought there were so many topics covered, but the topic that really struck me, I think it was just mentioned briefly, but it really stuck in my head, was the authenticity. And that's when I heard you talking about authenticity, I realized, yes, this is big. This is a big topic for the people who I usually do these interviews for, because frankly, we all struggle with authenticity, or most of us, like a definite most of us. And especially when you're an online entrepreneur, when you're not authentic, you may struggle getting clients because they will not be able to trust you. And you also lose your self-confidence when you do not allow yourself to be authentic. So this is going to be our main topic today. But first, Paula, if you could share a little bit of your backstory with us.
Sure. I grew up as the younger of 2 sons of a pastor in the Midwest of America, the United States, in Ohio and Kentucky. And then right after seminary, headed to New York, where I lived for 35 years. And I was the CEO of a large organization there, a nonprofit religious organization. I've always done a lot of different things. I also was the editor at large of a national magazine. I was the host of a national television show. I was a caseworker, adoption caseworker, doing adoptive placements of children from different countries. So I've done a lot of different kinds of work over the years. But I knew from the time I was 3 or 4 years of age that I was transgender. I just knew that in the world that I was living in, which was a very fundamentalist religious world, that was not ever going to be possible to transition. So I just tried to put it out of my mind. And the longer I lived, the more difficult that became. And so about 10 years ago, I finally talked to my wife and said, I think that I'm not going to be able to make it through life without transitioning. And it's probably time to start thinking about that. And then really just 6 years ago, did I fully transition from male to female. I was very successful as a male. The organization that I was the CEO of, that I worked with for 35 years, was a little tiny organization when I took it over and became one of the largest in the United States at what it did. Also worked in Western Europe. And so I went from a very powerful position in the world to a position of absolutely zero power. Lost thousands of friends and all of my income. And it was a very, very difficult decision. But fortunately for me, things have gone well post-transition, which is not always true for transgender people. So I'm quite fortunate in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You lost thousands of friends. Wow, that is definitely a big cost in there. So tell me, with the job, you couldn't keep the job. Did you know about that? Did you know that that was going to be the cost? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I knew that would be the case. In the United States, actually until a Supreme Court decision just this past week, if you were a transgender person, you could be fired in all but 21 states. In 21 states, you cannot be fired for being transgender. And the 2 states in which I had a legal residence, New York and Colorado, where I live now, both of those states are states that do protect your rights if you're transgender. But in all 50 states of the United States, if you work for a religious corporation, they are exempt from all anti-discrimination laws. And so they can fire you for whatever reason they want to fire you for. So I knew I would lose my job. I was extremely well known within my denomination, a denomination of about 7,000 people in the US. And I knew that I would not be kept on with the organization, even though I had been with them for 35 years and had had crazy amounts of success and never had a bad review. But I knew that I would end up losing that job. I did not know it would be so swiftly. I lost my job within 7 days of the time that I came out, even though at that time I wasn't sure I was transitioning. So just by coming out as being transgender, I lost my job. The thing I did not expect is that I also lost my pension, which probably was worth in the neighborhood of $1 million. And that I did not expect. So that was a huge financial loss to me, pretty much my whole retirement. Yeah. And so that was profoundly disturbing. They also had about $500,000 of my own money that they did not want to give back, that was on loan to the organization. I had to fight to get that back, but fortunately I got that back, and that was able to take care of my needs for the time when I was not able to work post-transition.
Wow. I have no idea about the legalities of losing one's pension, but it doesn't sound legal. So
yeah, unfortunately, it was legal. It was one of those things where I did talk to attorneys about it, and they said, well, it's possible you could win a lawsuit, but under the circumstances, the religious organizations in the United States have a lot of leeway to do whatever they like, because a lot of the anti-discrimination laws never would have been passed if they did not give religious exemptions. And so that is one of the unfortunate parts of American society.
I see. I see. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but glad you got back on your feet so swiftly for us to see you today. And I'm sure it took a lot of courage, and just maybe a little bit of a couple of words on authenticity. So when I say, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, my client who is gay sent me this Twitter from I think a man who was gay, and he said he has been struggling. He was struggling all life with authenticity, and I just saw that tweet, and I'm like, that's what everybody's struggling with. I mean, you are no different than us, you know, right? Of course, there's the external pressure, yes, which is much bigger than for a straight person, or I mean, any person who doesn't stand out in any way, I guess, because when we're different, it doesn't really matter how different you are. You're not normal, you know, normal here, the bucket of normal here, you're outside. So and then he said, yeah, you're right, we do struggle with authenticity. So this is why we're talking about this, because we often don't realize that we are not being authentic, and we live in this world that was created for us by our families, by our teachers, by our friends later in life, and we grow and continue on a path, continue, and at a point in time, and this is oftentimes when people come to me, we realize, okay, I don't know who I am anymore. And I used to be at that point as well. That happened to me after I was depressed. I had no idea what I was doing on this planet, and I had no idea who I was. So it's a brilliant point to be in life, given that you actually afterwards find out who you are. Many people never do, and they just realize it on their deathbed. And so I just want to raise this topic here for that reason, so that maybe some of you guys who are watching realize, oh, maybe I am not authentic enough. But you said you knew when you were 3 or 4 years old. So how does it feel when you know you're somebody else that you show externally? Do you remember that? So that we can.
Well, I do, but I think that actually is a common experience for most all of us. I think that all of us in childhood there comes a point, certainly if we have any interiority at all or any curiosity about life, and some people don't. Some people have been so wounded that early in life they dissociate from themselves and they just pretty much follow the motions through life. They're never really fully awake to themselves. But the majority of us are able to be present to ourselves early in life. And so you're lying in bed at night, and the big people who come in to put you to bed, to tuck you in, to kiss you goodnight, those people don't know who you are. Only you know who you are. And you get the sense of yourself from looking at those big people. In fact, as an infant, your entire sense of becoming a separate being is based on looking into your mother's face and seeing yourself reflected in her smile, in her pleasure at being with you. But by the time we begin to see our independence from that primary caregiver, we begin to repress it, to put it aside. And so we have to think back to childhood often to remember those times when we were lying in bed thinking to ourselves, but who they say I am is not in fact who I am. No one knows who I am but me. No one can tell me who I am but me. And unfortunately, I think a lot of us grow up trying to become what our parents need us to be or want us to be. There's a whole chapter that I've devoted to that in my memoir, which will be coming out next year with Simon & Schuster. But I often say that the most important thing a parent can give a child is for the parent to live his or her life as fully as they possibly can. Because when they're able to do that for themselves, they're able to free their children to live their own life as fully as they possibly can. And it's difficult for a child to do that if they have not seen it modeled for them. And it was not modeled for me. I think with both of my parents, they were wonderful and loving people. Both passed away just in the last year. My father at 96, my mother at 93. So they lived full lives. But I would say that neither one of them ever lived their own lives. In my father's case, his mother always told him from the time he was a little thing that he was going to be a pastor. And so that's what he became and never really questioned it. And my mother had a lot of limitations on her life. In fact, when I think about it, I actually believe the life that I'm living now is the life she would have liked. A life where you're traveling all over the world and speaking. And in reality, she was raised in a day in which you were just a housewife. You were not allowed to work outside the home. You were a full-time caregiver for your children and your spouse, and that was not ever something that suited her. And so it was difficult for them, I think, throughout their lives. And I think it's also one of the reasons that it was later in my own life, before I finally just took control of my life to become the person I knew myself to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it takes so much courage to just admit to yourself that you're not the person who you truly are, that you're not being the person who you truly are. A lot of us are afraid even of admitting that because that has consequences. When you say A,
It does. It does. Well, I think a lot of people are so terrified of their own authenticity because they see the world as not a welcoming place, but as a terrifying place.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people live their lives in such a way that you actually could put on their tombstone, safe at last, you know, that they actually have never been fully alive and have never felt fully safe. They're just living, waiting to die. And when they do die, it's a fulfillment of the life they have lived. Okay, now I'm safe, but you never really live.
Yeah.
If you're going to truly live your life as you are and as you need to be, there are going to be times of great fear. There are going to be times of great consternation. You're going to lose a lot. And those losses are too great for a lot of people to go through. I feel like it was easier for me to be able to live authentically in that I had decades of white male entitlement. I was a very successful person, and in fact, my financial success is still allowing me to live in a beautiful house in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. I'm able to supplement income that I earned a long time ago with my public speaking. So really, I had a lot of privilege that allowed me to take a risk that I don't think was nearly as difficult for me to take as it might have been for others.
I see. I see. That definitely plays a role, but then there's the courage which enables us. It just enables us, because courage is something that you need for 20 seconds. I heard that somewhere a few months ago. You just need 20 seconds of courage sometimes to do something that you have been wondering.
Yeah, and courage is not stepping forward without any fear.
Yeah.
Courage is stepping forward even though you're absolutely filled with fear.
Oh, yes.
Courage is something you do in the midst of being terrified. It is not an easy thing ever.
Absolutely. So we have spoken a little bit about the costs. I want to compare the cost versus the value. What's the return on investment of being authentic? You said you knew you were going to lose a lot, losing friends, losing money, losing your job. Who else knows what else? Maybe we can talk about it a little bit more. And then what did you gain? You knew that you were going to gain more. What is that gain there?
So the whole question of authenticity it's a difficult one. I don't think that we have an authentic self. I think we can live authentically, because I think we're always becoming. And so any sense of authentic self would be momentary. And it's interesting for me, even how that line ended up in my first TED Talk. It wasn't there until the night before. I was having a hard time memorizing the talk, which is required if you're doing a TED Talk. And the coach that I was working with for TEDx Mile High here in Denver, which is one of the largest TEDx's in the world, she is also the head coach for TED itself. And so I asked her the next morning, I said, I keep forgetting one section, and I changed the line, and now I'm not forgetting it. And she said, well, what's the line? And I said that the authentic life is sacred and holy and for the greater good. And I said, are we good with that line? And she said, yes. And they have to vet those kind of lines, because you know that the talk is going to be heard all over the world. So the language needs to be something that's going to be understood all over the world.
Yeah.
And that is language that is understood, that living authentically is sacred and holy and for the greater good. And it's interesting because I have actually brought that line into 2 of the 3 additional TED Talks I have done. I just found a way to work it in, because I think it really is sacred and holy and for the greater good. There's always a cost in living authentically. In my case, I think it was something I almost didn't have a choice in. You know, early in life, you're busy building resume virtues. You want to slay dragons and build kingdoms and amass fortunes, and then you stop working on resume virtues and you start working on eulogy virtues at some point in life. You find you have fewer friends but deeper friendships, that you're not getting your sense of self from outside, but you're getting your sense of self from deep inside your own soul. And I think when you're in this second half of life, that you're thinking more about the eulogy virtues, I think this is the point at which often you find yourself called to something and you recognize you don't have a choice any longer, that you really must answer that call. And for me, that's how this was experienced. It was a sense of knowing that I was called to live authentically and knowing what I was going to lose, and actually crying all night long, all the way to dawn, the day that I recognized that I was called to transition. It was one of the most difficult days of my life, because I realized how much was going to be lost.
Interesting, because I usually, when I realize that I need to transition in any sense from yesterday to
Hmm.
today, just as a
Right.
different person. I think it happens for us many times if you're lucky, I guess, through life, if you allow yourself to do that. uh,
Hmm.
there is a little bit of grief, but always how I recognize. I want to ask you if you have the same way of recognizing that this is the right thing. When I make a decision, it just feels so light, as if the decision, when it's this unmade, is very, very heavy on you and you have no idea about that. Once you make the right decision, everything is just different. Is You feel like you're, I don't know, 2 centimeters taller.
I think that that is true. I think in my case, there were so many losses that were involved in it. I knew I would be losing a marriage of 40 years. I knew it would be extremely difficult for my children. And I knew that I was going to lose literally thousands of friends. So in my case, I knew that the losses were going to be staggering. And yet, even with that recognition, there was a strong sense of relief and release.
Mm-hmm.
There was a recognition the next morning that I really had no choice in this matter, and that I needed to live authentically and just trust where life was going to take me. And I've not ever been a person who trusted in the basic goodness of life.
Mm-hmm.
I always saw life as frightening, and that you had to be on guard all the time. And so for me to actually surrender and trust that life would bring its own rewards, even where it appeared to me there was no pathway, that was new for me.
Absolutely, that kind of trust, that's big. So what you're saying is that this decision was really subconscious. It's not like you made a list. It's not like you said, okay,
Oh
this
my goodness, no, right. No,
absolutely.
it was, I mean, it happened to me. There was a point in time, I was watching my favorite television show of all time, which was an extremely well done American show that finished up 10 years ago. It was called Lost. And there came a point in the final season where the protagonist of the show recognizes he's been called by the God figure to die. And I recognized that day
Oh,
that this was my calling to figuratively die. And I screamed and yelled at the God who may or may not be there. How could you do this to me? I'm going to lose everything. But I knew I had been called. And as I often say, you reject a call at your own peril.
mhm, mhm. Amazing, that feeling. And you know what? I love to watch movies. They have changed me so tremendously. And I like that you mentioned that, because a lot of people don't appreciate them enough, I feel. And it's just, like show business. For me, it's not. There's so many people who
Oh,
put
it's,
their thoughts and work into movies, and they are ready. They can cause a profound change.
well,
Yeah.
we're a narrative based species, if you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't sleep without dreaming, and we don't dream in mathematical equations, we dream in stories. So our need for story is actually biological. And we always have, as a species, made story a central focal point of our lives. When we look at the biggest progress that we made as a species in our own evolution, it's when we went from being a species that was focused on blood kin to being a tribal species. That was what shifted us to make rapid progress forward, was once we became a tribal species. And what was it that caused us to become a tribal or community-based species? A lot of people assume it was the need for protection or safety. It was not. We came together in our search for meaning, in
Oh.
our search for story that would give us meaning. So think Stonehenge. We will forever be interested in Stonehenge because we don't know exactly what it's speaking, but we do know that it is in fact story based, that there is some kind of narrative behind it that brought a group of people together. And so we do know that our need for story is in fact built into our species.
That is so true. Interestingly, my last two interviews were about storytelling.
Oh, that's so
Quite
fascinating. Yeah, I love storytelling. I've been a pastor for a long time, and I've spoken in some of the largest churches in the United States. And I've always preached narratives. There are so many fascinating narratives. I happen to be a Christian and a post-evangelical Christian. So I come from a tradition that deals a lot with the stories of the Bible. And there's fascinating depth in those stories if we can get past their literal telling. And so I've been speaking narratives for decades.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing that. Let's end here. It was an amazing interview. Thank you for sharing so honestly and sharing your wisdom as well. Tell me, how do you want to be found on the internet? We're going to post links under the interview.
Yeah, that'd be great. It's just paulastonewilliams.com. And that pretty much can take you to everything that I've done. If you go to YouTube and want to see, 3 of my 4 TED Talks are there. Same thing, just go to YouTube and type in Paula Stone Williams and they'll pop right up.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for sharing and spending this time with us. It was wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, Paula Williams and Alex Tomaszewska. Bye.